Hi, welcome to our Web in Art, where hopefully we're going to get a lot of good ideas, get juiced with those ideas from Art 1, 2, 3, 4 with a little bit of AP. I'm Dr. Joan Marsh, and I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being here. I think you'll agree that art teachers are in the idea business. One of the very first projects that I've done in most years of my teaching was to give the kids an opportunity to design a nameplate. It could either be on an index card, it could be on a small piece of paper, it could be, a in-between size paper, or like this one was in the front cover of an Art 3 sketchbook. It was a 2-page spread. But what they were doing here is 16 variations of their name and their initials, and it identified their book like a book plate. But you'll see that names are used in an imaginative and creative way. The execution of the media, which was generally black marker, either rapidographics or ink and brush, was very neat and consistent. And you learn a lot about how your students do this project. Are they going to be neat? Are they going to be sloppy? Are their skills well developed already? Or do we have some work to do? So it does teach you a lot about your kids. You learn their names, but you also are introduced to the students' skills. Nicolaides, in his book The Natural Way to Draw, teaches blind and modified contour drawing. I believe anybody that can write their name can learn to draw. Here you see the 4th day of drawing, about the 4th day, where kids stack their shoes up. We'd done many blind contour exercises, and then we modified it by looking up and down at our paper, changing colors every time they changed shoes. On the left, a toothpick dipped in ink, drawing a handful. You see a color line design problem where the students were given paper. They had to fold it in half, fold it in half, fold it in half to create 8 blocks, and then into those squares or rectangles they created a varied line design, using straight lines, zigzag, curved and straight, and then had to play with warm against cool colors to have their name have contrast and stand out. Top left, a different book cover design, and then on the bottom a still life was filled with the patterns that they created. A very successful project year after year. And here's a close-up of just the name designs. These made beautiful open house displays because we put them on 8-foot panels, and because we used the same sets of markers, they matched and made a beautiful quilt-like pattern. Each year we teach color theory, and here we did a new spin on color where Dorothy Exis, who had a father who owned a paint company, actually had the red, yellow, and blue mixing into secondaries, mixing into tertiaries, and she gave this to her father on Father's Day. On the right, you see a live model that is posed, and that live model has been drawn and then repeated 4 times so that each area of the model is an opportunity to play with the different colors. And of course, if they overlap, they could also use the mixed colors that would be created by red and yellow turning orange. You can also take bizarre subject matter, like a trip to the zoo, and instead of the rhino being gray, he could turn blue. Or instead of the giraffe being yellow with brown, they could be warm colors or cool colors like you see here, or triad harmonies, or any kind of harmony that you want the kids to play with. This is a favorite project of mine called Decisions, and it gave Art 1 students an opportunity at mid-semester to show me that they knew how to draw in a beautiful line drawing on an 18 by 24 sheet of paper after drawing and looking at a mammoth-sized still life, and they could choose from up to 18 different media choices. Like media choice A might have been crayons, media choice B, colored pencil, media choice C, cut paper, etc., etc. And the only guideline was that they had to be sure and put everything back on the shelf where A, B, C, D, and all the media the spaces were labeled, to put the things back so that the next class could find what they needed. But they were always beautiful, and it gave you an opportunity to have lots of things going on at the same time in your class. Very exciting. You can certainly expect beautiful color results when you're working in oil pastels with Dr. Martin's dyes, and the resist that you get from the two not interacting with one another. Jenny Griffin did this. It was a miniature still life of nail polish bottles, and she left the pencil drawings exposed so that when the Dr. Martin's dye went in, it would sink into those where the words and lines were, for a beautiful result. Here's another happy accident where I gave my Art Ones white and yellow crayons to draw the plants in the room when we were practicing contour drawing. And Stephanie Chow did this one without any instruction on watercolor. I told them to then swirl their brush around in the watercolor pans and hit those lines that they could barely see. And this was a beautiful result that won a gold key in Scholastic Art Awards. If first-year students focus on objects and things, second-year students come into the art room and every day there's a new model that is kind of telling a story. Like the top left here, the boy is laying on the floor and the students were sitting on tables above him for a bird's eye view. The one to the right, the girl is studying. She's sitting at a desk and we stacked up books and a coffee cup and sometimes an alarm clock and change colors. They were told they could change colors on different contours. And they were also told to make the books and everything larger than the person to play with the idea of exaggeration. Bottom left, we played with a washout method where they drew a musician playing a guitar and then used white opaque ink to paint right up to their pencil lines, and then we inked the whole thing for sort of a print look. It's a washout method. And then on the bottom right, we drew a girl listening to a seashell with a toothpick dipped in ink. So I think it's good to experiment with different media almost daily when you're doing this to come about with some exciting results. And the kids, kind of they get on fire about the way that the media works, and they kind of forget that they're drawing people, which is good. Here's one of those fun poses, and it's really good when you have a sleepy student. Just ask if anybody's sleepy when they come into your room and literally let them lay on a pillow with sheets and set up sort of a bedroom scene where a student fell asleep studying. And then let them play in charcoal in the negative space and maybe white Prismacolor on the face of the clock, or like you see in the top right, create a dream that the boy is having while he's sleeping. Really a fun piece by second-year students. Fourth-year students continue life drawing, and they do a little bit more challenging subject matter, foreshortening their models, and the kids sit at the model's feet or at the model's head or the model's arm, and they draw whatever body part is closest to them in foreshortening, where it's larger and all the connectors are smaller and whatever's off in the distance is smaller. These two were done by Paul Briggs, who had never done contour drawing, and did these in fine point markers of the classmate holding a horn, and he did two in the same day. You see the ant's eye view and the worm's eye view where the students are at the boy on the ladder's feet. And after they do this series of contour drawings, we then continue them in the media of their choice for their portfolios. On the left you see cut paper, and on the right you see Prismacolor by Carrie with a message going around the outside edge. But these can be stunning. And here are another couple of contours. The one on the left, the girl was walking down the hall with colored hair, and I asked if she'd be our model, so Brian drew her in black fine point marker on purple paper. Beautiful drawing, so he didn't take it any further. On the right, Nancy actually used the contour drawing on a Canson paper and then used gouache and left the pencil lines untouched to sort of use to have a line or vein of the colored paper showing throughout the piece. So two more examples of contours continued. Lidgy came up with a creative solution where he took two of his figure studies and actually added one to the one that was already on gray bogus paper and overlapped the legs over the reclining figure. And he had worked in fine point black marker, so he left the marker lines exposed to show that kind of vein of black throughout the piece. Working in Prismacolor, a beautiful piece. After drawing people, I then have the students draw themselves. So on the left you see a result of 4 years of contour drawing, where in one class period on newsprint, Michelle Ng drew herself in a modified contour approach. And I love line drawings like this. On the right, I had my middle school students draw a self-portrait every day, and on the 4th day they picked their favorite one, and then I gave them sentence stems to complete. My name is, I am, and she says I am not perfect, I dream of, I do not, and she says I do not hate. So Taylor Miller, one of my sweethearts from Dulles Middle School, did this particular self-portrait, and they all did such a great job with it. But when you want to draw people, self-portraiture is the way to go because you'll always have a model. Here again are 2 more examples after the 5 to 10 days of life drawing. The students then came in. On the left, Christy posed for Carrie as a cowgirl, and so this is Prismacolor on black Canson paper, and on the right, Chris Leem was a model, and she crossed her cowboy boot under a denim skirt, and the students drew her in a foreshortened approach and then filled in the colors with pointillism. Here are 3 more of her self-portraits, one done late at night in the warm colors, and then another fine point marker, and then below it her series of self-portraits were scanned, put into puzzle pieces. She wrote a beautiful statement about how we're constantly and completely incomplete as we change and grow, and won 2nd place in Culture Shapers. I believe it was a $1,500 cash award. Very proud of her. And here's a full figure self-portrait. Dana wanted to include a background in her self-portrait. Notice the army boots. In Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, the book talks about how the very first thing we begin to recognize is the shape of our mother's face when we cry out as babies. So this project and process has always been extremely successful, where the students are put under spotlights and they are trained to see the shapes of either the shadows only or the highlights only. And it's amazing what they can do in 35 minutes in a class period, and they're just so incredibly good. You can also have the students do a combination of self-portraits, like on the left, highlights one day, shadows the next, and then highlights and shadows the 3rd and 4th day. Or on the right, Stephen Elter did 3 self-portraits in different media. So I tested the theory about shapes in my middle school classes. My 8th graders had live models under spotlights, and one day we drew with white Prismacolor on maroon construction paper, black markers on newsprint, green markers on newsprint, and a crosshatch technique. And they did very, very well. This was an interesting experiment where the students would push and pull parts of designs together and then back apart. They drew the model under the spotlight. They chose their favorite one to transfer to a piece of 18 by 24 construction paper. I had given them a black piece of paper and a white piece of paper, and they had to create a geometric shape design out of all the pieces. They couldn't throw anything away. And then they used that black and white design in the background of their portrait. We then used the same pattern in the background on a large batik floor pillow that they waxed and dyed. And then we waxed and dyed the self-portrait on cotton fabric and immersed it in a dye bath, and then let it dry, and then used embroidery for enhancement. A really fun 6-part design problem. It's always fun when a student wants to experiment with different media. Here you see Becca had chalk pastel added to the highlights and shadows. Brad Conklin did this. And on the left, Brad wanted to add some charcoal to get the middle values after he had cross-hatched in marker. Here are what I call digital originals, where the students drew in contour drawing in their sketchbook. Then we scanned them, always kept the mother piece, which was the original drawing, and then they played in Photoshop to create a series of investigations in different colors on top of their self-portraits. I called this digital and traditional, which was tradigital. Always great results. Kim was an Art 1 student, but a Digital Media 1 student, Electronic Media 1, and she did a contour drawing of herself and then wanted to play with complementary colors on each of the different faces. And she said to me much later that, Miss Marsh, I didn't really get contour drawing until I had to use my mouse to do the contour drawing, and at that time we just had Clarisworks. But she did a beautiful large-scale piece playing with her own drawings, and they did 4 different ones in different complementary colors. Here are some different results. Some started in sketchbooks and were scanned and developed further digitally, and others were photographs that were enhanced in Adobe Photoshop. These two beauties were self-portraits done on huge paper and then taken down into the printmaking studio and made into silk screen. And both of these were at the entrance of their 2-person show, and Barbara had her work on one side of the gallery and Chelsea had hers on the other side. Beautiful examples of self-portraiture in serigraph. Here is a fragmented self-portrait assignment where the students had to draw themselves and then fragment the space and put different parts of their life into the different fragments. The past, what they love, symbolism, the watch symbolic of time, Chinese New Year, and different symbols that tell a story about who they are. In the next few slides, we'll look briefly at what the students have done. Here, Karen brought her own still life, a pair of jeans, some shirts and socks, and hung them on hangers under a spotlight in the back of the room and studied them in charcoal. Here's a self-portrait drawn by looking in a reflective object and doing a study of themselves. Here are 2 sketchbook studies. On the left, scissors and forks drawn in an 8 by 8 inch format, and on the right, a zone drawing of techniques, a study of the plants with cross-hatching, value studies, stippling, and each zone has a different technique. You can ask students questions and have them answer it visually. Here are 3 different solutions to the question, what would I see if I walked into your world? 4th year students did what I called an inside story, based upon the idea that the more you look in at someone's journal, the more you get to know them. Just like if you could open up the insides of someone or read their thoughts in their head, you'd know more about them. In the inside story, the students had to draw a 2-page spread and then paint it, and it had openings like the butterfly wings have openings in them, and the image on the right is the back side of that page, and in little tiny writing in between on the white are the goals that Amber had for herself for her senior year. Here's another example of goals written inside a senior journal, and Paul Briggs wrote it, and he spelled his name P-A-U-L, and then Briggs down in a vertical arrangement, and then the beginning of each letter began each sentence. For P, it was paint, draw, and ink at the age of 70, and still love it as much as I do today. A was animate my own cartoon, and then go to work for Walt Disney. U was utilize God's gift of nature to show beauty in my artwork. artwork, and L was live life to the fullest and to appreciate everything I receive, and on and on. And Paul is a Walt Disney animator now, but this was a beautiful example of having students write down their goals and begin to formalize in their mind and visualize in their mind what they want to do with the rest of their life. And I'm a big believer that if you write things down, you make it happen. Next, we'll look at a series of slides that is one prop with many possibilities. Here's my 10-speed bike that I brought into the classroom just in time for Karen, who was instructed in her scholarship application to draw a bike. And she drew it and won a full paid 4-year scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design. It's another approach to a bike in doing just a shadow study in paint. Here we see another study of the same bike with a negative contour approach where the students drew the bike and emphasized it by filling in the negative space with hatch marks. My Art 1 classes did this amazing assignment using drawings of the same bike, and they could combine them in different ways, overlap them, place patterns in the negative space, fragment the drawing. There were just several different possibilities. They were working in complementary colors with either red and green, blue and orange, or yellow and violet. They were working in acrylic paint, so they sat together in new seating arrangements by which complementary colors they were using. And the students said they will never forget the complementary colors because then we hung exhibits in and outside the room in the complementary color harmonies. They were beautiful. We also took advantage in my Art 3 and 4 class of putting a live model on top of the bike under a spotlight, and then the students worked in markers and/or ink and brush to interpret that model under the spotlight on a bike. Another prop in my classroom that created lots of different possibilities were the plants in my room, because I always had lots of plants in my classroom. And in this particular one, the students had to draw the plants not in their pots, but making them look like they were in the environment. And Paul simply wanted to use markers and colorless blenders, and did that in this one. After Paul did his blenders, colorless blenders and markers, he wanted to do a series. So then he drew the plants as muscles on the man pushing out of the earth for his Survival of Man series. And then he asked if he could do another man in this series where he was in the city and junk parts and mechanical parts where it became his muscle. And so this was his Survival of Man series, inspired by the line and foliage. It's funny how we transform our own teaching style in projects, because this began as a simple line drawing, and then it went to pen and ink and cross-hatching, and then into colored pencil, and then I started giving media choices where the students could pretty much pick whatever media they wanted to do. And in this one, Michelle did Prismacolor against watercolor skies with an acrylic foreground, and it was a beautiful result. You know you've done something right when the students do the assignment, as Melissa did on the left-hand side here, where she added the watercolor and the butterflies and the beautiful foliage, and then asked to do a second line in foliage on a canvas that was very large and had the silhouette of the lady in the background. Two more examples of line and foliage. Christy Spivey brought in fresh sunflowers, where Michelle Ng brought in dried Johnson grass and grasses and thistles that she found on a country road. And they both did the line and foliage assignment, but look how very different they are, both in media use and the final look of the piece. A very exciting outcome. Here in my middle school, I actually did a similar kind of study, but in Art 1 they had to do a positive study where they work just in ink and brush. On the left here are two sixth graders, and then you see color studies done on the bottom and on the right by seventh and eighth graders, where they drew the plants, transferred them to paper, and then flip-flopped their positives and negatives. In the middle one, in paints, that was an Art 1 student at Northbrook who did warm colors in the plants and cool colors in the negative space. So amazing outcomes when you keep experimenting with one idea in many different ways. And here again are some of the Art 1s in black on white. Art 2s had white on black. Art 3s could use gray at the top right here. And then some color studies again that were flip-flopped in terms of having borders where the colors change on that outside border. Students can sometimes use a device in order to help them and to build confidence, and grid drawings do just that, where students transfer part of an image square by square to a larger piece of paper. And here's one of those. We're going to look at these very quickly. Here's two more grid drawings with very different styles. My eighth graders surprised me when every single student in the class was successful in turning a gridded photograph in grayscale into a beautiful color study. The colored grid drawings that we just looked at, the self-portraits, were inspired by these pop art celebrity portraits that we did in group. They were on 8-foot panels, and when we put them in the hallways, they were so well received and so popular. We also did pop art, paper mache, and paper sculpture, and we did large sculptures of candy, but the candy had to be about art. Like instead of Pop-Tarts, it was pop art. And we also did huge banners in the hallways in groups, like this Art Rips banner. Here's one of my very favorite paper maches, one of those sculptures that the students did. It's Mr. Potato Head crying because his wife became French fries. Julie did it, and she spent so much time on all the detail. And to the right is a paper mache Elvis done by Martin. Every picture tells a story, where students put different parts of a picture together, like a contour drawing, a gesture, a silhouette, different symbols, and every single thing in the picture has to pertain to the story that's being told. Ghost drawings are one of those assignments that you give your kids that they think you've gone off the deep end, because I have students draw bottles and then erase them, draw bottles and erase them, draw bottles and erase them, and leaving a ghost in fine thin charcoal. And then there's many steps to it, but I did it with my 8th graders and they loved it. They said it was their favorite assignment all year. But I saw it in a college and just made up the assignment, and have had great success with it so far. Here are some more ghosts, and the one on the right is the beginning of the ghost assignment in the middle school. Now here are some fourth year student work. Brett Osborne had some portfolio pieces where he was just investigating lots of different media. So lots of different ideas where you see a contour drawing and then it developed further in cut paper. 2 thumbprint murals that were huge poster size. Jimi Hendrix done in Mickey, a pen and ink, a self-portrait under a spotlight. And then he did a series of markers with colorless blenders of pictures that tell stories. He was a caricature artist at Astro World, eventually Six Flags. And I said he has to quit doing the single character, and put it together into comp 4 of those. One of them is shown here with the alien. I believe middle school students should also build portfolios. So here's Taylor Miller's 7th grade portfolio with her positive and negative plant study in grayscale and then turned into color. Her nameplate above it, her grid drawing of herself above that, her got art t-shirt design for the end of the year I Create art show, and she's wearing her paper mache cow is right behind that, her self-portrait with her sentence stems to the right, and her Houston Livestock Rodeo Art Show entry where she won a first place ribbon. She was a fabulous artist. I missed her when I was no longer teaching middle school. Painting like Picasso was simply a matter of, instead of drawing just a regular contour drawing, we drew it in sort of a cubistic style and then turned those into paintings on canvas. We also did another painting like Picasso where we did 3 complementary color self-portraits on a page and then tore them up, glued them down to a piece of paper, and then used those as a springboard for paintings. These kinds of assignments are always fun. On the top left, I just had the kids draw scissors and change colors and draw scissors. They were using the modified approach in middle school. On the right and then on the bottom, we fragmented and broke up the space and changed colors with blue on orange and then orange on blue, or use the complementary colors. A lot of fun to fragment the space and use everyday objects and play with the design and figure ground ambiguity. In graduate school, I studied the techniques of the great masters, so I came back to my 3rd and 4th year students and taught them the monochromatic lift-out method of the Southern Renaissance painter, and it was so successful. This was Darlene Kilpatrick's mother and grandmother, who were both teachers in Texas in the early 1800s. Another fun experimental approach is to experiment with media on one page with an image, subject matter like plants or either faces, and you change the media in each of the zones. Using the city as a source of design for urban landscapes, you see these are thumbnail paintings that were done in complementary colors, or rather opposite temperature of colors, and these were 3 by the same student before we got onto canvas. I think it's important to plan your work and work your plan. Here, the same idea of using the city or places that people have been in an impressionistic approach with pointillism, and this was simply tempera paint on a large piece of construction paper. Sunsets and atmospheres are the perfect approach for watercolor because you can watercolor and instantly get the look of a sky with wet on wet approaches. And here we used atmospheres and intensity, and you see we dropped salt into the dark areas of the sailboat. We always ended the year with installations, and on the right here you see a mural painted at the entrance of George Washington Carver High School by Brad Conklin, and on the left a slit slot sculpture by Matt and Philip, inspired by the 3 musicians by Picasso. At Carver we also had a sculpture garden with installations, and here you see the plan for the sculpture and the sculpture on the left, and we had benches all over the campus. This is just one of them that we painted and had sitting all over the campus in the area of the art department. Just like Chuck Close, using the thumb to print, the value studies of Thumbprint Murals can be an exciting prospect for students. These 2 were done by Brett Osborne, and they're 4 18 by 24 sheets of paper taped together on the back. Using Lino prints as propaganda, I had my students take something that they felt very strongly about and make a propaganda print. And here Amber McClure also took a bad print and enhanced it with Prismacolor. Here's 2 prints, a Lino print on a page out of a magazine and a reduction woodcut on the right by Hannah, both self-portraits, Jessica and Hannah. Sometime when you're printing a series, some of the prints might miss ink on the corner or on the center of the print. Rather than ruin those, throw those prints away, you can cut the prints up and use the best parts of each one to extrapolate prints to create something like you see here. Here are Batik fabric designs where we created cut paper designs and then waxed the fabric and dropped the fabric into cold dye baths and then stuffed them for big floor pillows. In the following slides, we're going to do some video clips. And before we get started, I want to just thank with a few stops and starts. So again, we'll get better at it, but thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of the show, and thank you again for joining us on the webinar.